Good evening. I just want to welcome you to Plateau Christian Church's Answers class. My name is Rick Page. I'm the minister at Plateau Christian Church. And here's what we're doing. We have an opportunity, each and every one of us, to expand the reach of our church, and that is through small groups. Now, we've had an Answers class before. We were meeting on Sunday afternoons at the church, and just because we've got a multitude of people with families and retirees, the challenge was a good time to meet. And so it just makes sense that if you're one of those people who would like to continue with the Answers class, but do it on your own, you can. The inadequacy to this model is you don't have a give and take. We'll try and figure that out. Maybe we'll be able to stream at the same time, do a Zoom class, but that means you would be locked into a time and you could interact with the questions with that. The truth is, what we're pushing towards is a small group ministry, and that is to try and get folks who use their homes as evangelism, discipleship programs, opportunities, and reach beyond just the folks who show up on Sunday mornings at Plateau Christian Church. So why do that? I mean, what's the big purpose of a small group ministry? Number one, it's what worked for the early church. They didn't meet like we do, where the majority of the meetings were Sunday mornings in a building that they purchased. As a matter of fact, the church did not own a building until 350 years after the church was founded. The challenge with American model of churches is it almost rests on a build it and we will come sort of mentality. And unfortunately, our statistics for evangelism in the last few years in particular are showing that's horribly not working. What we're finding is that evangelism is working, and it is working in other countries, and ironically enough, most of those countries, we're talking a lot of third world countries or countries where religion, especially Christianity, is persecuted. Freedom of religion is not an ideal in a lot of countries. And so churches either can't afford to own a building, or the building cannot handle their capacity, or it's just a bad idea to have a building because that's where the authorities know you are if you have a building and people are meeting. So homes are the model by which the church evangelizes and trains and just shares fellowship. That's what's happening around the world. So what I'd like to do is just share with you tonight. We'll get back to our Answers class next week and share in the nature of God and be able to provide an opportunity for folks to watch and have lesson plans, that sort of thing, so that our facilitators in our homes can have a Bible study as we're used to, and particularly with the Answers class, because that gives us some foundational sort of beliefs that we all need to understand in order to be proper stewards of the education that we have, of the Bible that we have. So I want to read from Acts chapter 2, and I'll start at verse 41. Those who believed what Peter said were baptized and added to the church, about 3,000 in all. Now, most other translations start this just a little differently. They start the paragraph at verse 42. Verse 41 would be the end of the previous paragraph. This probably fits, though. The New Living Translation probably fits. They joined with other believers and devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship sharing in the Lord's Supper, and in prayer. Those are the four elements we really want to talk about as far as the model for the church, but also the model for small groups. A deep sense, verse 43, a deep sense of awe came over them all, and the apostles performed many miraculous signs and wonders. And all the believers met together constantly and shared everything they had. They sold their possessions and shared the proceeds with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their group those who were being saved. So there you see the model. The New Living Translation does make it appear that it was the Lord's Supper that they were meeting for in homes, which was the centerpiece of worship. But I think also, especially as we take the rest of the book of Acts and just see how teaching played out, it was in the small group, in the homes, that the teaching of the apostles took place. The reading of the letters from the apostles, those things took place in homes. They made copies in order to pass them around. The early church fathers, and when I talk early church fathers, it's those leaders of the church that wrote, particularly in the 2nd and 3rd century, the early church fathers gave us the background that Ephesus, for example, the church in Ephesus, was made up of 500 house churches, and each house church was led by an elder. So here in Acts chapter 2, you see the beginning of that. Eventually, as they moved away from Jerusalem, obviously the temple was not a place that they met daily. They would meet in synagogues, if there was a synagogue in town, but also as they moved to Gentile sort of towns and synagogues became fewer and far between, the home Bible study was where evangelism happened. That's where discipleship took place, and they changed the world. On the first day of the church, 3,000, of course, we just read, were added to their number on that day alone. And then we just read in the next two chapters that tomorrow we're going to be dealing with Acts chapter 5. In those chapters, we find that the number of men rose to about 5,000, which if factoring in that there would be a wife and 2 children on average for each male, then with 5,000 men, the church numbered upwards of 20,000 people. Amazing, considering at Jesus' death and resurrection, there might have only been 500 followers of Jesus. So immediately, in just a very, very short amount of time, there's a true logistics problem, and that is where do you put 20,000 people when you only had about 500 people to begin with? Well, they didn't go out and build new buildings. That's our thinking. That's what we would do. What they did was they just expanded their reach through homes. So of the 500 people, you have, if you just think that that's 125 men, you have 125 homes that you immediately have to accept the first 3,000 people. And as those people train and start to grow, then you had multiple homes to be able to evangelize and to be able to shepherd and disciple other folks. Notice, though, that there is something else that takes place in that verse 41 and 42 of Acts chapter 2. It lists in verse 42, they joined with the other believers and devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, which is the Bible. That's what we do. We study the Bible. And devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, sharing in the Lord's Supper and in prayer. So of those 4 elements, Bible study, fellowship, the Lord's Supper, and prayer, all of those could not be done in the temple or in the synagogue. As a matter of fact, all of those could be done in a home. The sharing of the apostles' teaching could happen in the temple or in the synagogue, and maybe prayer, but it's doubtful that folks would feel comfortable sharing their prayer concerns with folks who are antagonistic towards them. So prayer, that deep, abiding prayer, when we open ourselves up to our fellow believers and ask them to come alongside us in prayer, that most likely happened in homes. But then also the idea of fellowship happened in homes, and that's where there was caretaking. Nowadays, we have gotten things so backwards in our culture, and I'm talking American culture. We've gotten it so backwards that we put the burden upon the paid ministers of the church. We expect them to do all the visitation, and yet that's not the history of the church, and it's definitely not what we find in the New Testament. That caretaking, that shepherding, took place in homes, and then you back it up with historical teaching, and that's the church in the first 3 centuries. What we find is there's models where each home had an elder that was presiding over the home fellowship. There is your shepherd. There is the person who was taking care of the prayer needs and the concerns and taking them back maybe to the council in Jerusalem. But the model is quite different than our own. And there's something else that takes place in the midst of this. You see an explosive growth because the majority of people were involved in sharing the gospel. Fast forward to Acts chapter 8, and something interesting happens. The church had been told by Jesus in Acts chapter 1 that they would be his witnesses throughout the world. You're going to start in Jerusalem and Judea, Samaria, and the othermost parts of the earth, Jesus says. Well, for 10 years, they didn't do that. They were really good in Jerusalem, and they were good in Judea, but they didn't move too much past that. And then something interesting happens. Acts chapter 7, of course, is when Stephen is persecuted and killed. And then Acts chapter 8, verse 1, we find this nice little snapshot of the church. Saul was one of the official witnesses at the killing of Stephen. A great wave of persecution began that day, sweeping over the church in Jerusalem, and all the believers except the apostles fled into Judea and Samaria. Some godly men came and buried Stephen with loud weeping. Saul was going everywhere to devastate the church. He went from house to house, dragging out both men and women to throw them into jail. But believers who had fled Jerusalem went everywhere preaching the good news about Jesus. Isn't it interesting that even that first century church got a little too comfortable? And yes, they were evangelizing Jerusalem and Judea, but they weren't doing a great job of moving beyond that, even though Jesus had commanded them to do that. And so here comes this persecution by none other than Saul, who later on becomes Paul. And that persecution is the Holy Spirit's little push to get people out. And it's not the professionals. It's not the apostles who leave and go and evangelize. It is the people within the church who go and evangelize. All of that is to just cast the vision for those of us at Plateau Christian Church that we be a church that grows through home Bible study. I hope you will come alongside me, that you will open up your homes to home Bible studies, that you're going to invite your friends, you're going to invite your relatives, you're going to invite your neighbors. I'm going to recommend a book for everyone in the church, and I've mentioned it before. I've done a few sermon illustrations out of the book. It's been a while, but the book is The Gospel Comes with a House Key. And it's done by an amazing woman. It's written by an amazing woman who writes about her and her Presbyterian minister husband, their journey in opening up their home as an evangelistic outreach to their neighbors, their friends, and their loved ones. And it's a phenomenal book. It will not only open your eyes, but has the potential to really inspire you to do the same sort of thing in your own life. I would recommend you read it, and also join with us in this small group study. Now today is pretty short. What I'd like for us to do, and I'll have sessions at the church if people want to take advantage of it. We'll try and record them and post them on the web as well on our YouTube channel. But what I'd like to do is just train people on how to do these small groups. It helps if you open up with just kind of an icebreaker. Just get people used to coming. I think fellowship also includes hospitality, so I would recommend you at least have snacks, and they could be shared snacks, that everybody who comes just brings something. Rosario Butterworth, who wrote that book, The Gospel Comes with House Key, writes that she developed some recipes of things that she could throw together quickly and cheaply, and it wouldn't bust their bank or bust their bank account, to be able to provide for folks who came to these Bible studies. I would recommend something along the same line, that you do it simple. Breaking of bread is a phenomenal opportunity. I think you could then go into a period where you introduce your topic for the night. Just talk about the video, preview the video if you're going to use these videos. If not, if you're going to use your own material or you're going to choose a book of the Bible, then make sure you've studied before you start the Bible study. Open it up to the lesson, spend 20 minutes or so just in the lesson, and then have a question and answer period. For the videos we'll produce, like next week when we do the nature of God, there will be a PDF file that'll be connected just below the video that you can download, and you can ask and answer the questions, and a facilitator guide along with it. And then after the lesson, open it up to prayer time. Spend time in prayer. And when I say spend time in prayer, just go around the room and share what everybody is dealing with, what their updates are. Get to know people. And as I make this push for evangelism, to reach out our homes, to use our homes as facilities for evangelism, remember this most important principle. Don't make people a project. Truly care about them. And that fellowship time is when you get to know them. That prayer time is when you really get to know them. And spend time just finding out what their prayer concerns are, and then truly spend time in prayer. We'll give you some ideas on how to handle that. Also, in our training, it'll be how to handle some difficult people, in case you have somebody who just wants to domineer the group, or somebody who just has some sort of agenda, things along that line. But also how you can handle some of the complex questions that come up. We're here for you. I'm just praying for you. I'm praying that this is going to be one of God's many tools in order to grow our congregation and to spread our outreach. I give you thanks. You have a good evening.